Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical-ish. This is episode 5 of the Ancient Mysteries Iceberg. We finally made it to tier 3, which really starts to get interesting because it has topics that not a lot of people have heard about. So not to take too much of your time, let's jump right into it. Number 1, Ancient Automatons. The word automation or automaton comes from Greek, with Homer being the first to use this term. He describes these machines as self-moving objects, more specifically referring to godly objects used in Olympus. Although it first was used to describe magical objects, the Greeks eventually were able to design and build automatons, usually used as toys or other forms of entertainment. One notable example being bronze animals on display at the Olympic Games. The famous Greek mathematician, Hero of Alexandria, devised a water basin that featured metal birds which sang. A mechanical owl would turn its head to look at the birds, making them go quiet. One of his most well-known creations was a wind wheel. This is possibly the earliest example of man harnessing the power of wind in a non-sea environment. Mythical stories during this time, and not just from Greece. In Jewish legend, King Solomon created a throne whereby a mechanism was put into motion when he stood upon it. Mechanical animals such as lions and tigers helped him up each step by way of a wheel, making their paws move to support him. At the top of the steps, Solomon's crown would be delivered by an eagle, and then he was seated upon the throne. More wheels would cause each animal to deliver its respective cry as a means of striking terror into those who stood before the king. Lastly, a dove would bring King Solomon a Torah scroll containing the laws of God. During the Hellenistic period, these automatons advanced greatly, with these devices using levers and pulleys to build self-moving machines. The Isle of Rhodes is most notable for having automatons in its city square to impress visitors. The majority of technology developed by the Greeks seems to have been only for entertainment, spectacle, and toys. However, the Antikythera mechanism, which was around the 1st century BC, recovered from a sunken ship in the Aegean Sea, appears to be the first analog computer. It was designed to make astronomical calculations possible in order to determine the timing of the Olympics. With many different stories around automatons being present throughout the ancient world, a good portion of them seem to hold technology way before its time. This begs the question of if some of these automatons were real or in fact just stories told by ancient writers. Number 2, the Gunderstrup Cauldron. Around 2,000 years ago, someone near the town of Gunderstrup, Denmark, buried a stack of silver panels within a silver bowl. Each panel has detailed artwork related to Celtic mythology and religion, showing animals, heroes, and gods. In 1891, a peat collector working in the bogs uncovered the panels, and after study by archaeologists, they realized the plates could be attached to the bowl to form what we know as the Gunderstrup Cauldron. What's most interesting about the cauldron is that initially it was thought to be strictly a Celtic piece, but after further examination, it shows that it in fact was a combination of many different cultural influences around the ancient world. The history of the Gunderstrup Cauldron dates back to between 150 BC and the birth of Christ. Today, most experts believe that the Celtic cauldron was forged in the Balkans with Thracian metalworking. But clearly, someone who was possibly of Celtic origin and well-versed in Celtic religion took great care to ensure that many significant religious icons were displayed on the vessel. What we don't know is what the cauldron was used for, as well as why it was so carefully buried inside the peat bog. During the Celtic Iron Age, it was not uncommon for sacrifices to be made to the bogs, as the people believed that the bogs were the home of the gods due to the necessary resources found within the bogs. One leading theory about the cauldron is that it was buried alongside the owner once he had passed away in order to accompany him into the afterlife. Other than that, not much is really known about the Gunderstrup Cauldron, which is why we find it on tier 3 of the Ancient Mysteries Iceberg. Number 3, the Long Man of Wilmington. The Long Man of Wilmington, or the Wilmington Giant, is a hill figure on the steep slopes of Wendover Hill near Wilmington, England. It was originally believed by archaeologists to be from around the Iron Age until a study in 2003 dated it to roughly the 16th or 17th century AD. It is a figure of a man holding 2 long rods or staves and is drawn so that when viewed from the base of the hill, it seems like a proportional image. Theories of its origin include marking the location of Orion's constellation in the sky, directly above the hill, and as a tribute to Odin. The 2 main functioning theories as of today are 1, an artistic monk from the priory nearby made it, or 2, was made in protest of the persecution of Protestant martyrs by local villagers in the 1550s. Funny enough, it was painted green during World War II, so as not to be used by German pilots as a landmark for navigation. Other than that, I think the Long Man of Wilmington has been debunked as an ancient mystery, but still raises some questions about who made it and why they made it. Number 4, Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede is mentioned in the book of Daniel as king of Babylon between Belshazzar and Cyrus the Great. But he is not known to history, and no additional king can be placed between the known figures of Belshazzar and Cyrus. Most scholars view him as literary fiction, but some have tried to harmonize the book of Daniel with history by identifying him with various known figures, notably Cyrus or Gobryas, the general who was first to enter Babylon when it fell to the Persians in 539 BC. Darius is mentioned a couple times in the book of Daniel, in Daniel 5, Daniel 6, and Daniel 9, but the book of Daniel is not regarded by scholars as a reliable guide to history. The broad consensus is that Daniel is not a historical figure, with the author appearing to have taken the name from a legendary figure of a distant past mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. While it is a book featuring prophecies, the book that bears Daniel's name is an apocalypse, not a book of prophecy, and its contents are a cryptic allusion to the persecution of the Jews by the Greek king Antiochus IV. There is broad agreement that the stories making up chapters 1 through 6 are legendary in character, and that the visions of chapters 7 through 12 were added during the persecution of Antiochus, and the book itself being completed soon after in 164 BC. Daniel 5 and Daniel 6 belong to the folktales making up the first half of the book. The language of Daniel 5, for example, follows ancient Near Eastern conventions, which are in some cases precisely those used in Daniel. Daniel 6 is based on a classical Babylonian folktale in the telling of a courtier who suffers disgrace at the hands of evil enemies, but is eventually restored due to the intervention of a kindly God. In the story in Daniel, this is the God of Israel. In the Babylonian original, the pit of lions is a metaphor for human adversaries in court, but the biblical tale, he turns the metaphorical lions into real animals. In Daniel 9, Daniel, pondering the meaning of Jeremiah's prophecy that Jerusalem would remain desolate for 70 years, is told by the angel Gabriel that the 70 years should be taken to mean 70 weeks, literally sevens of years. Verse 1 sets the time of Daniel's vision as the first year of Darius' son Ahasuerus, by birth a Mede. But no Darius is known to history, nor can any king of Babylon be placed between the genuine historical figures of Belshazzar and Cyrus. So did Darius actually exist, or is this just a combination of Babylonian folktales passed down through the generations and eventually compiled into the book of Daniel? Number 5, Rongorongo. Rongorongo is a system of glyphs discovered in the 19th century on Easter Island that appeared to be writing or proto-writing. Numerous attempts at decipherment have been made, with none being successful. Although some calendrical and what might prove to be genealogical information has been identified, none of these glyphs can actually be read. If Rongorongo does prove to be writing and proves to be an independent invention, it would be one of the very few independent inventions of writing in human history. 24 wooden objects bearing Rongorongo inscriptions, some heavily weathered, burned, or otherwise damaged, were collected in the late 19th century and are now scattered in museums and private collections. None actually remain on Easter Island, and the objects are mostly tablets shaped from irregular pieces of wood, sometimes driftwood, but includes a chieftain's staff, a birdman statuette, and 2 Riemuro ornaments. There are also a few petroglyphs which may include short Rongorongo inscriptions, but oral history suggests that only a small elite was ever literate and that the tablets were sacred. Interestingly enough, in 1932, Wilhelm de Hevesi suggested a link between the Rongorongo script of Easter Island and the Indus script of the Indus Valley civilization, claiming that as many as 40 Rongorongo symbols had a correlating symbol in the Indus script. For a while, the idea was entertained and debated until radiocarbon dating of the Indus Valley civilization was placed between circa 3300 and 1900 BC. A finding that officially separated the two cultures by over 2,000 years. Recent research, however, has opened the debate again, as the finding of Indus Valley DNA in Australian Aborigines suggests a contact between the two cultures in 2000 BC. And these are, in fact, the peoples that did eventually colonize Easter Island, so it would be really interesting to see if that actual connection between the Indus Valley script and Rongorongo has held up over that length of time. Number 6, the Black Sea Flood. The Aegean Sea and Black Sea used to be separated by a raised ridge called the Bosphorus, which kept salty seawater out of the Black Sea, or I guess what used to be a freshwater lake. But at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were raised due to the ice sheets melting at an increased rate, Water from the Mediterranean rose above this ridge, connecting the two seas. A controversial theory proposed in 1997 states the water surged with a force of over 200 Niagara Falls, which could have wiped out early human settlements on the banks of the lake and inspired the stories of Noah's Ark, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and other catastrophic flood myths within the region. Underwater archaeologists have in fact found evidence of an ancient shoreline 400 feet below the current sea level by carbon dating shells in the area. This would support the hypothesis that a catastrophic flood wiped out almost 20,000 square miles around the lake. Although it's likely that this flood wasn't as devastating as it's made out to be in flood myths like Noah's Ark and the Epic of Gilgamesh, I think it would have a vast impact on the humans around that region and would have been seared into the collective memory. Number 7. Vinca Symbols. Vinca symbols are yet another form of an undecipherable language found in Central and Southeastern Europe on Neolithic-era artifacts. There is a lot of dispute about whether these are an early form of writing or simply symbols used for design, with many scholars describing these as pre-writing or proto-writing. The earliest discovery of these objects was in 1875 when a cache of objects was uncovered with previously unknown symbols, which raised a lot of debate about when these items originated from. Tablets found in 1961 revived the debate when radiocarbon dating placed them before 4000 BC, which predates the writing systems of the Sumerians and the Minoans. Many different theories have emerged from these symbols due to how short the inscriptions are and how simple the markings can be. Leading theories are property marks, numerical signs, religious symbols, or as stated before, an early form of writing. Number 8. Ancient Greek zombies. In the 1980s, over 3,000 graves were discovered in an ancient Greek necropolis in Sicily. What's interesting about this is that 2 of these graves were pinned down within due to the supposed belief that these 2 bodies had the ability to reanimate, leave their graves, and harm the living. Ancient Greeks believed these to be what we call zombies, and to make sure they didn't raise from the dead, they would dismember the bodies or pin them down within their graves by tying them down, flipping them upside down, or placing heavy objects over their stomachs, head, or feet. Nobody really knows why these 2 bodies in particular were singled out as zombies, but theories include they were outsiders, illegitimate children, victims of murder, plague, or curses. There are many different examples of this being practiced around ancient Greece, and there's no real evidence of whether the Greeks actually believed these to be zombies or if this was simply just a funerary superstition that they practiced throughout ancient Greece. Number 9. Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus is a legendary Hellenistic figure that originated as a syncretic combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. He is the purported author of Hermetica, a widely diverse series of ancient and medieval pseudepigraphical texts that lay the basis for various philosophical systems known as Hermeticism. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the Hermetica enjoyed great prestige and were popular among alchemists. Hermes was also strongly associated with astrology, for example by the influential Islamic astrologer Abu Mashar al-Balkhi. The Hermetic tradition consequently refers to alchemy, magic, astrology, and related subjects. The texts are usually divided into 2 categories, the philosophical and the technical Hermetica. The former deals mainly with philosophy, and the latter with practical magic, potions, and alchemy. During the Renaissance, it was accepted that Hermes Trismegistus was a contemporary of Moses. However, after Isaac Casaubon's demonstration in 1614, that the Hermetic writings must postdate the advent of Christianity. The whole of Renaissance Hermeticism therefore collapsed. There is evidence of this individual being identified in many different religions around the ancient world, but since this can be traced to a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, it is highly unlikely that this figure was actually a real person. Number 10. Mithras and Mithraism. Mithraism was an underground Roman religious group that worshipped a pagan deity called Mithras. Although it was a covert religion, it once was so widespread it is theorized to be an early rival to Christianity. The belief system and cosmology of Mithraism has stumped historians for thousands of years, and the members of the religion have not left any written documents of their beliefs. One theory holds that the cult's central iconography is a star map. The bull Mithras kills in the Tauroctony is actually the zodiac Taurus. By slaying Taurus, the god is therefore responsible for shifting the precession of the equinoxes. This cosmic movement was secret knowledge shared among indoctrinated members of the ancient cult during a time when the universe was still seen as a stagnant entity. Ancient Romans believed Mithras was based on a Persian god, though most scholars have since debunked this theory. Other than the iconography on the walls of their places of worship, we know next to nothing about their belief system of these people. What is known for certain is that Mithraism arose sometime during the 1st century and then continued to spread throughout the empire until it eventually disbanded toward the end of the 4th century. They believed the epicenter to be Rome, and with it being so popular among the soldiers, temples have been found as far as England and Turkey. According to a poem written by an ancient Roman poet, initiates were called syndoxi, which loosely translates from Latin, meaning that they had been united by a handshake. Meetings were literally underground operations, with members gathering in the dark, subterranean temples, and sometimes built inside caves to feast and worship within the windowless walls adorned with religious artwork. But other than that, not much is known about this mystery cult. Well, that about wraps it up for the first part of Tier 3. If you enjoyed watching and you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already. And if you have any suggestions on any items that you would like me to cover more in depth, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. But at the very least, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.